everything's available at backtracking at that time. Jennifer.
Yeah, I have a question. Is this normally the process that's gone through to ask for numbers?
To ask for any information request that the election committee gets during the non-election cycle, all of them come to the board. Actually, even the ones during the election cycle will probably come to the board. In lots of information that we have public. Numbers would be one of those instances that's public information that's available for the public. If we got asked during the election cycle, we would give it, no problem. With that being said, we haven't generated any of the reports. We haven't done any of the work yet because there is a window for registration, and there'll be a thing in the paper, reminding people to register to vote. So the information would be out of date. With that, though, that's what we do. We follow the code. The code's very specific. All the requests go to board.
And with this request, was this one required to come in front of your committee?
No, this request was made about 2 weeks ago, about a week ago now. And at that point, it was stated that it needed to go to the board, and there was a question whether it needed to go to the board or not. But the code's very specific. It states all requests. We've already dealt with this in the past. Just this summer, we had several requests. All of them had to come from the board. So we treated it it had to come to the board.
I'm trying to understand what the process is and exactly what information needs to come. You're saying all of it because this is the second request that I'm seeing since December 4th. On December 4th, the board was all notified of another request, and I'm trying to understand what happens to those requests that are made. I don't see that one on this, but I'm guessing that's not a consideration anymore. I want to know how is this different than that one?
I'm unfamiliar with any previous request. This one's the only request that I got was made there, and it wasn't registered voters. The request was for non-registered voters.
Because I'm trying to understand what this is that I'm looking at here, as opposed to another request, but that you informed the board that a request was made to you, and that it needed to go through this process, and you made citations on Chapter 10.
Correct.
And what that was going through, and I'm asking, if that was the process for that, why isn't the process for this?
It's the same process, and
okay.
I believe that's why this discussion being called. I believe that's why this is on the agenda, because that request was made, but it was made to staff, it was made to us, and that's not the proper procedure. The proper procedure is to come to the board. It has to come to the board because, like as you stated, it's specific right in the room. There was a question on whether whose information is it, and it's election committee's information. Tribal registrar and enrollment collect the data on our behalf. We put it in the code that way to protect staff and to protect us. All the requests need to come from the board. So we treated it just like any other request. It needs to come from the board. So it was denied, and now we're here.
Okay, and in the process that you outlined in the emails to the board,
yes,
you said that it had to go to your committee meeting, and you had to present it to the committee prior to presenting it to the board. Is that correct?
No, that might have, in my editing, I think I may have misformed a little bit there. It needs to come from the board. It doesn't need to come to the committee. The committee got the request. They're just going to ask you. It's just going to come straight to you. Any election, like any registered voter information, any non-registered voter information, is basically protected. It's protected in the code deliberately. We make it for it has to come to the board. We don't want that people circumnavigate the procedures. We don't want anybody to be perceived as coming, any board member to come in there and ask for information. That's not how it works. It needs to come from the board as a whole and delivered to the board as a whole.
Because in that whole process, in that string of emails that we received, there was a procedure that was outlined that I didn't see followed with this request. And that's what I'm trying to understand. I understand that the request that you had before that we saw was asking for addresses. This one is asking just for a number. But is the procedure still the same?
The procedure would be still exactly the same, whether it be a number or whether it be a list. It's an informational request, and like I said, we collect that data. We haven't prepared it at all, because we waited for the election cycle, which is only, about 60 days away now at this point. We haven't prepared anything, so that we wouldn't have to, we'd have to run the numbers, and we'd have to go get the numbers, and that's one of the reasons, it needs to come to the board, though, at this time. If it was to come after a registration window is closed, this information would be freely available. I could, if anybody asked, I'll look at it, I can give that number out easily. We haven't prepared it, it's not available yet, and the code is very specific, any information request, you can come to me back.
And the reason that I'm asking all these questions is this is my first go around with any request that had come from your committee at all. And I've seen conflict between the first request of December 4th and this one, and it causes me some great concern. I saw some things that happened during the course of those communications that I thought was improper, to say the least. And I want to know, why is this process different than what was outlined in the emails? Are you saying that you were mistaken, that it doesn't need to go to your committee first?
It doesn't need to go to the committee, but it needs to go to the board. And that step needs to be in there no matter what. And that, primarily, it needs to go to the board. It can't come
Well, eventually it needs to go to the board, but does it need to go to your committee first before it goes to the board?
Where you are tripping up is when we're in the middle of an election, ballots may be open mail, and the election committee is meeting once or twice a week dealing with these things. During those periods, a lot of questions come in to the chairman, and because we meet so often, by force of habit, he brings them to the committee and says, hey, we have these 3 or 4 requests that have come in, and generally for things, numbers that are created, established, we can hand them out. I think that's what Mike's email is really referring to, is while we're in election, the committee is meeting, and these things are coming in, we have an agenda. Request is just kind of a standing item, and he mentions to them, they're generally not problematic. Because we're not in the session, not in the cycle, we're not meeting all the time, these ones are a little different. So they don't have to go to the committee, but when we're meeting so much by force of habit, at times they do. Make sense? Ultimately, it still comes here though, no matter what.
Ultimately, it does, but I've seen a difference in the process between that request of December 4th and the one we're looking at now. And I don't know if other board members are equally asking this question. I see heads nodding. I saw a process that was being denied. And I thought, okay, it needs to go to the committee, and then it comes to the board. And now I'm saying, here it is at the board. The numbers and the addresses that were asked for at that time, that they both need to come to the board. Eventually, I want to know if the process is that it goes back to the committee. I don't care when you guys are regularly scheduled. Is it a requirement before that comes?
It is not a requirement. The code says that the request goes to the board. It doesn't say anything about the committee.
Okay, so on December 4th, they didn't even have to notify you.
It needed to come from the board. What had happened is
It has to go originally to the election chair, who brings it to the board.
and I can bring it to the board. It can happen that way. Our request can be simply made directly to you. As in the case of summer with CJ. CJ brought the request directly to you guys. You guys directed us to provide the information. That's how that procedure needs to work. That's how it needs to work. It needs to go that way. That way everybody's on the same page. There's no question of whether something's getting done or not, that you guys are aware of everything that's being handled with voter registration information.
Because from my position, when they're asking for addresses or numbers, there's a process that's set out.
Yes.
We've had 2 requests in less than 2 weeks, 2 entirely different processes. So I'm not inclined to say yes to either one until I know exactly how
The process is, regardless of what I've written in there, the process is it needs to come to the board.
eventually.
No, you guys need to direct the committee to release that information. We will not release that information without you guys having a consensus to release that information.
Right.
And what has happened is that enrollment was going to release that information, and it needed election committee approval, and we didn't approve it.
Did this one need election committee approval?
Well, I'm a little confused as to which one we're actually looking at. This one says number of registered voters, but the original request was for non-registered voters. So I'm not entirely sure which number you guys
Point of information.
You want me to answer that? Sure. So,
Give us point of information for the record to be changed.
I won't answer that.
Well,
I thought that was the point of information.
no, actually, and she could finish right after. Mike, if the board directs information to be released, hypothetical,
Yeah.
and then you take it to the committee, if the committee finds that by code or something else that it shouldn't be released, will you then come back to the board and say, we won't do this because?
If there was a code interpretation that needed to be addressed, absolutely I bring it to the board before I continue.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That was my point of information. That's what I wanted to know.
And to my understanding, with those events, that's what happened.
No, there was no formal request that was made to the committee. It was not going through this chain. It wasn't going to the board. It was going through the staff into it. And the staff was responding. And so I had to interject at that point. They denied the request because it had to deal with voter registration information. And we had steps. There's forms that need to be signed off on. And that I got requested to sign off on forms to release that information. And I denied it because it didn't come to me. But
No, that's not
That's just the number of registered voters.
On you.
So the point, all right, I have a point of information because this is being presented as if board members didn't get the follow-up communications, and I hope that's not being done purposely. Originally, it was the number, and then I was advised that what my request should have been would be to run a list of the number of registered and a list of the number of non-registered, and then to see if they reconcile. And I was advised of that by the registrar. And so then I put that into an email, but I never wanted a list. In fact, I sent that out to the board, and if any board member wants to dispute this in public, they're welcome to do that. I clarified immediately after people start writing communications back and forth that, why do we need a list? And I wrote back, I don't need the list. I didn't intend to request a list. This is what I'm looking for. So I'm hoping we're not being disingenuous by presenting something other than that, because I can provide communications to Betty and anybody who wants to see the whole chain. I'll do that, the whole chain of communication back and forth. However, I obviously am deferring to the committee and the dominion that they have over the number, just a simple number of registered voters. And I think that that's not necessary, but no, I don't know that anybody's ever requested it out on an election cycle. And like you said earlier, when it's requested during the election cycle, it's forthcoming. It's pretty straightforward. So,
well, other than the request that we had last summer, and I want to make sure that that's clear too. We don't have the choice. The election committee doesn't have the choice to say, well, it's okay for this number, but not okay for the list. It's okay for these numbers, but not these numbers. We don't have that ability. We don't have that choice to pick and choose. And I informed this to the enrollment, basically, too, that we don't have that luxury to pick and choose. We don't want that luxury to pick and choose. It's very specific. The request is an informational request. We'll treat it as an informational request. Right.
okay, I think Jennifer had ran up and Darcy. Oh, sorry, Diana, Jennifer, Darcy.
I don't even know where to begin. Microphone. I'll say it now. Oh, right here. It said, I don't even know where to begin. I don't even know where to begin. I have the email trail here. And when was this code established? I guess would be my first question, because I don't want to be disingenuous, but I'm really surprised that you wouldn't know that was the proper channel. It is a question, yeah.
So, I have never, ever been told that it's a requirement to get the number of registered voters. And as Mike actually explained, typically when people ask for that, it's after the election cycle has begun. And I believe that anybody that's asked it has been given the number. So this is probably the first time anybody's ever asked it outside of an election cycle, other than TJ. And if you read through the communications back and forth, it says pending legal review. You know, if it's cleared by legal, because I'm not, you know, I've never asked for something that I thought would be
Okay,
to be
you actually answered the first
and
one.
you have copies of that.
I do have copies. I have copies of all of it. We're just going to call it spade a spade here and quit messing around with some games.
I find that to be, actually you're impugning, you're violating the meeting.
I'm violating what?
Yeah, because remember we're not.
Violating what?
The meeting.
I apologize. I take that back. Let me say this. You asked for a list of non-registered and registered voters with addresses.
I didn't ask for
That was the first email that was sent out by, and that's the one Director McLeod is referring to. Mike got a hold of the board and said, I cannot give this information out. I do have a committee meeting. I will bring it up to them, but I can't get this information out. Then there was some back and forth. Every single board member responded and said that information can't go out unless there's a request. What I find alarming is that you knew that. You knew that you needed to get a request.
No, I did not. That wouldn't have.
When was the code established, Mike? When was this code in this law?
Actually, I'm going to rule that this is dilatory. The request is a registered number of voters.
I'm trying to figure out. I have a responsibility. I'm trying to figure out.
And board members, unless somebody can refute it, it was clarified that once a board member raised the issue that a list was being requested, I immediately responded, and before several of you responded, or sent messages that nobody's looking for the list. It's simply the number of registered voters. So, according to our parliamentary meeting rules, what we're discussing is releasing the number of registered voters. And if your discussion is germane to that...
All right, I'll keep it at that. Okay. So, Director Sorensen asked earlier, what's the reason that you want the number of registered voters?
Because if the number is, depending on what the number is, then maybe I'll write in my chair article that people need to register to vote. Maybe next week I'll bring a request for the board to appropriate an amount to send out a voter registration, which we haven't done for a couple of years. It's ongoing now, so people can register anytime. So those would be the reasons, because I think a democracy works better when people are registered to vote.
Well, this snowballed into some misunderstanding it started out to be, and it snowballed into a lot of staff members feeling threatened. This is my interpretation of it up here as a member of this board. And we do have the email trail. It is all right in front of us. And I'm very upset that it went down this way. I am very, very upset because so many people are accused of being thieves and corrupt and you name it, you know, and I'm sick of this stuff, really, really am. And I truly believe that you were around when the code was written, truly believe that you know I couldn't call up and get a copy of numbers or addresses or anything like that. And it's going to be twisted around and turned around, but I don't appreciate what went on, and I don't appreciate staff being put in the position that they were in. And I want to thank you and everybody else that upheld our laws and said this can't happen. So I appreciate you doing that. I appreciate you bringing it to the board, and I appreciate the board that said it couldn't happen. So.
Okay, Jennifer.
Yeah, I tried to make a point of information. Actually, you were the one who brought up the discussion and emails. It was, I was asking other questions, and you brought up, and you made a statement that you didn't ask for a list. According to the email that we got, you asked specifically for a list, and you...
Point of information.
I'm still...
No, actually, I have a point
I know,
of...
you can't...
No, actually, I do. I have a point of information. It's the meeting rule code. Aaron, if you can get the code out and ready, because it seems like we're going to need it. Did you get a copy subsequent to that clarified that I was not requesting the list? Yes or no?
Did you write that I want a list and I want it sorted by address? Yes or
That's
no?
not my question.
That's my answer.
Did you get an email after that clarified? First, I
Board members...
will answer your question. I will answer your question. Yes. And I explained it in front of this whole public that what I intended to request was for the list to be run in order to give me the number of registered voters. So now my question to you, I answered your question in good faith. Did you get a subsequent memo, several emails from me that said I was not looking for the list?
And I did answer your
Okay.
question. I said yes, after the board members objected to you asking for a list of addresses and sorted that.
Okay, all right.
And you only changed the request to a number after we objected to you requesting a list sorted by addresses. And that's in this email trail as well.
But that's your interpretation of the reason why I changed my request.
No, it's a fact. It came after we objected.
That's true, but you're impugning your interpretation that I only did it because I got caught trying to get a list.
And I corrected it as a statement of fact. Chronologically, it came
Okay.
after board members objected.
Point made. Okay, next is Darcy.
Okay, on this number of registered voters, and it says to be published in the tribal webpage, what are you be publishing? I just want to be specific.
Just the numbers.
Just the number of registered voters.
Anybody else? Senator. That's 3 times.
Oh, we're going to follow the rules that we get to speak only 2 times now?
I'm just reminding you that,
It's not been our practice.
okay,
Thank you.
go ahead, I'm using the floor. I didn't have to.
I think you do have to, because I'm not speaking more than twice.
Actually, no, you're not. The code says twice.
And I
Go
think our
ahead.
code also says that you have to wait to the end.
Not if I'm doing a point of information.
So far, yours haven't only been pointed out.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank
You have the floor.
Thank you. Did you write my directive stance unless John Burnett can explain a legal reason not to? The only information requested, this is where you say 2 categories outlined in a previous email. There's nothing confidential or proprietary about this directive, and failure to comply may constitute an act of insubordination.
Your
Did you write that?
question has been asked and answered. You just
Not
asked
this
the
one.
question.
No, I did not. I asked you about a different one.
We're moving on. You asked
No,
the next
answer the question, yes or no. Did you write that?
I answered your question already.
Could you repeat it for me?
The next person is Deb.
Could somebody please tell me then what was said?
Failure to comply may constitute an act of insubordination.
Okay, next, Deb.
That's what was written. How, I feel for the staff. My heart went out to Julie and Mike because I can't believe that they were put in such an uncomfortable situation between holding up the law and us as board members and you as the chairman. I find it reprehensible. And I also find it a violation of the trust that we hold with you and you're supposed to hold with the staff as our leader.
Okay. Anybody else?
Danny has
Danny.
We're not done yet.
2 things. One, what was requested and what you're clarifying you wanted. I'm not going to handpick and say who actually did what. What I'm going to say is, what was written, if they'd have followed it, it broke our law. Even whether it was your intent or not, okay? So we got to be careful what we send out and request from our staff. I am so glad that staff didn't follow it because they'd been breaking our law. It would have been the person requesting it. It would have been the staff who did it. I hope that message gets out to the staff. The law pertains to all of us. No individual can change the law. And intent sometimes, because you're in a hurry or whatever, what was sent out, you know, and if I try to send something out in a hurry, y'all would get a bunch of goofy cops. But we need to be precise in what we ask for, and there's nothing wrong with questioning a person saying, hey, is this what you really want? And I say that because it might not be what was really the information they really want. The number of registered voters, there's no problem with that.
Shouldn't be.
Okay? But the way it was written, I do see a problem. And I was one of the first ones that said something out, and I'm not much sending out emails. Alright? So, we need to clarify what we're doing. But staff has got to remember, it's you give up information or things that you're not supposed to, it's you who's going to suffer for it. And I say that not only because of this board. I got to talk to past boards where they were told to do something, and the board threw them underneath the bus later and said, oh no, you didn't have a resolution. You shouldn't have done it. So I will continually preach that. If you don't have a resolution, I wouldn't do it. I'm done.
DJ.
Given the stated reason for the number of registered voters pertaining to the item on the agenda, is there any utility in actually publishing the number of registered voters versus the number of eligible voters? And the list of, and by list I don't mean addresses, I mean a group of eligible voters versus the group of registered voters would show what the disparity is in the number of people who are registered to vote. Well, then there's subgroups of bad addresses and good addresses within the registered voters, but just for utility purposes, that would show what percentage of our eligible voters are actually registered to vote. If we're going to do an election drive, to me that would...
Go ahead. Sure.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Mike.
We could get the utility of having a voter registration drive and showing the numbers of how many are registered and how many are eligible and how many have registered. The list would be pretty extensive. I don't know if we'd be able to...
Well, I mean, I'm going to ask for a list.
But the actual numbers for the states having a registration drive, absolutely.
That would require an amendment to the motion. That's not what I asked for, but...
Okay. I just wondered if there was utility in
I
having that.
I think so. Happening.
Okay, I just thought before we take some sort of action on this. If I contacted you and asked for a number of unregistered voters and a number of registered voters, would you be able to provide that to me per our code?
No, I would tell you that the request needs to go to the board.
All right, so then all I can say here is that I can certainly understand the miscommunication between a list versus a number.
I wouldn't give the number either. I wouldn't give a number.
I understand that.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure of that.
Okay.
And, you know, normally when somebody miscommunicates, it's real easy to backtrack and say, I'm sorry, that's not what I wanted, and move forward to there. But it just needs to be stated that it was a directive to an employee that started this. And it concluded with a sentence that says, failure to comply may constitute an act of insubordination. I have a problem with that. The rest could all be understood as some sort of miscommunication. We began with that, a directive to an employee, which it should have never been a directive to an employee. And it concluded with failure to comply with insubordination. So,
Anybody else? Richard.
most people on this board, and maybe some people in the audience would know that if I had made this request, that I'd be hung out to dry. It'd be all over Facebook that I was abusing my office. So I think that what everybody else says, I agree with. There was an email sent with exactly what was requested, and it wasn't what's being brought up tonight. Now we've called a special meeting to change the story, and I really have a problem with the directive because these people report to the board of directors. And like I said, if I would have made some kind of directive to an employee, there probably would have been a referendum out there for a recall petition or something on me. So I am very thankful that we have strong staff that stood up to this and let the board know what's going on. And I hope that this sends a message to all our staff that if there's any funny business going on, they feel free to come to the board of directors, and we will stand behind our staff following our code.
Anybody else?
Motion to direct legal counsel to do investigation. Support.
There's actually is an amendment, you have to amend the current motion. So is that a motion to amend?
You got a motion on the table. You already have a motion on the table.
We wouldn't be discussing it if we didn't have a motion on the table.
So I mean, I don't think
It's
I
not,
don't think that would be germane to the main motion.
I don't think so either, but.
You gotta think so.
Well, we have legal here.
Yeah.
What's the question?
Oh, actually, I roll on that.
Okay.
I agree with Keith, it's not germane to the motion.
But if we don't agree with the motion, have another determination by the board, right?
Pardon me?
If we don't agree with your ruling, we can motion to have
Yes,
the
you
board.
can, you can override the ruling.
And at this point, we're asking questions because we don't know. I would rather...
Actually, you made a motion. You made a motion in a second, but I just rolled it out of order. So you have the prerogative to, point of information, you have the prerogative to overrule the ruling. And it takes
Point of
council
information.
majority.
Is
Yes,
there a second thought, Jim?
yes, I heard it.
We want to accomplish them both. How do we do it?
All right, so you have to overrule the ruling of the chairperson. So now, we're going back to the main motion. Who's next on the list?
Point of information.
Yes.
I have a question about the content of your motion, but your overruling does not allow me to ask that to legal?
That's correct, as Keith made a clarification that's not germane.
Point of order on that. I believe that in the meeting rules, it has to be germane to the outcome of the first, which it wouldn't be. So you have to finish the first, and then you could then make a new motion, put it on the table.
Right.
Investigation.
You have to suspend
After we
suspend the rules to
finish
add it to the agenda.
a motion to suspend the rules to add to...
Actually, we have to finish the current motion.
Finish it.
We've received training for this.
Not germane.
So, are there any other board members that want to speak to the main motion, which is to release the number of registered voters? Okay, so then I'll speak last then. So I will publish the entire chain so you can all see exactly what was said. I started out with a request for the number of registered voters.